Hi everyone! Today we're going to take a look at the best budget gaming CPU in the market for this year. First, we're going to show you our top 10 best picks, and we'll talk about what you should look for before buying a budget gaming CPU. You can find links to all of the products we've mentioned in this video down in the description below. Let's get started. At the first position of our list, we have AMD Ryzen 5 3606 core. The Ryzen 5 3600 has an almost legendary reputation among PC gaming enthusiasts. Ever since its launch in 2019, gamers have always adored the mid-range 6-core chip from AMD, and for good reason. Not only is the Ryzen 5 3600 an incredible value for money, but it is also a decent productivity CPU that can perform moderately demanding tasks with relative ease in addition to gaming. It is also one of the best CPU for gaming on a budget. Speaking of gaming, the gaming performance of the Ryzen 5 3600 is great as well, due to the incredible IPC leap of Zen 2 when compared to Zen Plus. Under the hood, the Ryzen 5 3600 is packing 6 cores and 12 threads with a base clock of 3.6 GHz and a boost clock of 4.2 GHz. While these clock speed numbers might not sound that impressive, you should keep in mind that the Zen 2 architecture holds a big IPC instructions per clock advantage over comparative Intel and older Ryzen processors. The Ryzen 5 3600 is also packing 32 MB of L3 cache, which aids in single-threaded workloads such as games. You can also try your hand at CTR overclocking for Zen 2 if you are interested. Moving on to the next at number 2 with Intel Core i5 10600K. The Core i5 10600K is Intel's premium mid-range CPU from the Comet Lake series, and it is also a pretty decent little gaming CPU. Not only does the CPU contain 6 cores and 12 threads just like the Ryzen 5 3600, but it is also a little faster in gaming than the venerable Ryzen 5 due to Intel's faster clock speeds and lower latency. The Core i5 10600K is also unlocked for CPU overclocking, and it is one of the best overclocking CPU on the market right now. If we talk about pure gaming performance, the Core i5 10600K is quite a bit faster than the Ryzen 5 3600 or even the 3600X, which is the faster clocked variant of the Ryzen 5 3600. This is due to Intel's blazing fast clock speeds of up to 4.8 GHz on the 10600K, as well as lower latency between the cores. Speaking of overclocking, that is one of the strongest points of the 10600K since it can reach up to 5.0 GHz on all cores quite easily under a good cooler and when paired with a good motherboard. This puts its gaming performance right alongside the flagship Core i10900K. So if you are looking for the most possible FPS on a budget, the 10600K should be your CPU of choice. The number 3 position is held by AMD Ryzen 3 3300X. One of the most interesting CPU launches of the past few years is the Ryzen 3 3300X. This is AMD performance-focused Ryzen 3 CPU, which is supposed to bring the goodness of the Zen 2 architecture to the entry-level CPU tier. The Ryzen 3 3300X launched alongside the Ryzen 3 3100, and together these two CPU are supposed to take on Intel's i3 line head-to-head in the entry-level CPU market. Under the hood, the Ryzen 3 3300X is packing 4 cores and 8 threads, which is a configuration that is good enough for most games. What is interesting about the 3300X though is its unusually high gaming performance. The Ryzen 3 3300X is often seen challenging the 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 5 3600 in gaming benchmarks, while flat-out beating the previous generation Ryzen 5 2600. This improved gaming performance is due to the fact that the 4 cores on the 3300X reside on a single-core complex, which drastically reduces latency as compared to the 6-core and the 8-core models. This improves gaming performance significantly. Next at number 4, we have Intel Core i5 10400F. One of the best CPU in Intel's Comet Lake lineup in terms of value is the Core i5 10400F, which is also a 6-core 12-thread mid-range CPU. The 10400F is slightly faster than the previous generation 9400F, which was a very popular CPU among mid-range builders. Overall, it's also an excellent budget-friendly option that costs about the same as a Ryzen 5 3600. In terms of gaming performance, the 10400F competes head-to-head with the Ryzen 5 3600 for about the same price. This is good news for people looking for good value options in the CPU market, as now they have the option to select a CPU from either Intel or AMD. The 10400F does have some drawbacks though. As compared to the Ryzen 5 3600, the productivity performance of the 10400F is not as good as the Ryzen 5 3600. But that can be excused to some extent since these are value-focused options. Although it does come with a stock cooler, you can consider an affordable upgrade by taking a look at our list of the best budget CPU coolers. With that said, the 10400F is another option in the market that makes sense if the Ryzen 5 3600 is out of stock or really overpriced. It may not provide the highest FPS number out there, but it maximizes the value of your money when buying a CPU at this price point. The number 5 position is held by AMD Ryzen 5 2600. Another great value option from AMD now legendary Ryzen lineup is the venerable Ryzen 5 2600. This CPU was also a really popular CPU a couple of years ago, and it is still a viable option for a budget-oriented gaming machine. The Ryzen 5 2600 is based on the older Zen Plus architecture, which has slightly slower cores than any of the CPU listed here, but it is still a good performer in most games that are out there today. The R5 2600 is also a 6-core 12-thread processor with a base clock of 3.4 GHz and a boost clock of 3.9 GHz. What is great about the R5 2600 is that it can handle most productivity tasks really well thanks to its 6 cores and 12 threads. Its gaming performance is a bit behind the Ryzen 5 3600 and even the 3300X, but in comparison, the R5 2600 can be found quite a bit cheaper. All in all, the Ryzen 5 2600 is still a solid option for a budget gaming machine since it offers great value for the money even 3 years after its release. It may not be the best budget gaming CPU in 2022, but it is a versatile and robust CPU that maximizes your bang for the buck. The number 6 position is dominated by AMD Ryzen 5 3600s. The AMD Ryzen 5 3600X tops the most prestigious release list from the AMD house. Since its release, it has been the choice for gamers seeking a better gaming CPU in the mid-range segment. AMD mastered the art of building processors to handle multi-threaded workloads. The Ryzen 5 3600X is one such masterpiece that changed the way people looked at AMD. It comes with 6 cores and 12 threads like any other Ryzen 3000 series chip. This nifty piece of hardware comes with a 3.8 GHz base and a 4.4 GHz boost clock and has a TDP of 95 watt. The Ryzen 5 3600X boasts a 35 MB level 3 cache, which is more than double the 16 MB of the preceding Ryzen 5 2600X and Ryzen 5 2600. There is a cheaper alternative, the Ryzen 5 3600 that comes in at 3.6 GHz base and 4.2 GHz boost. It has a TDP of 65 watt and also shares the support for CPU-based PCI Express 4.0. You might want to opt for this if you wish a nick in your budget while not having to compromise much on specs. Moving on to the next at number 7 with AMD Ryzen 7 3700X 8-core. The AMD Ryzen 7 3700X is one of the most reliable and decent gaming CPU options available in the mid-range segment. Let us know why. AMD clearly has an upper hand when it comes to handling multi-threaded workloads. The AMD Ryzen 7 3700X has been carved impressively to deliver the power that the gamers seek. It features 8 cores and 16 threads, which is plenty for mid-range gaming chores, and has a base clock of 3.6 GHz, which can be boosted up to 4.4 GHz. The processor itself is much affordable considering its performance. Cooling the processor is no hassle, thanks to the thermal management on the chip and the cooler that comes bundled with this CPU. The biggest considerable addition to the 3rd-gen Ryzen devices is the support for PCIe 4.0. NVMe SSDs are 51% faster than the non-PCIe 4.0 SSDs. With a decent NVMe SSD, one can achieve sequential read speeds up to a whopping 5000 MB/s. The party doesn't end here. The PCIe 4.0, when paired with a capable graphics card like the Radeon RX 5700 XT or RX 5700, can perform exceptionally well. The number 8 position is held by Intel Core in an i10900K. Trust me, the Intel Core in an i10900K can be your go-to destination if you're on the market looking for the best gaming CPU in an Intel brand. The performance capabilities of Intel CPU don't need an introduction, especially in the gaming world. Intel, with the release of its latest gaming beast, the Intel Core in an i10900K, has left its competitors' mouths wide open. The Core in an i10900K has a base frequency of 3.7 GHz and a single-core turbo of 5.3 GHz with the aid of Intel's new thermal velocity boost. There is a substantial increment in the L3 cache compared to its predecessor, the 9900K. The cache size increased from 16 MB to 20 MB. With great performance comes the greater power gobble. There's a significant increase in the TDP from 95W up to 125W. It is lame that even expensive flagships from Intel don't share its support for the PCIe 4.0, while AMD is housing it in its most budget gaming CPU. Also, Intel Comet Lake S processors use the Z490 chipset and a new LG A1200 socket, which technically means that you cannot use existing motherboards with the Intel Core in an i10900K. Intel has played a cool trick in better thermal management on this chip by thinning down the die and implementing a much thicker heat spreader for better management of the increased heat as a result of the higher thermal design power, TDP. Next at number 9, we have AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. The AMD Ryzen 9 5950X is a high-performance CPU that delivers uncompromisable speeds at a reasonable price. While it's undoubtedly more expensive than some mid-range processors, this gaming CPU boasts 16 cores and 32 threads, which rival HEC-class hardware without the added price tag. The AMD Ryzen 9 5950X is compatible with all AMD 500 series motherboards. You'll need to apply an update to the BIOS, but the process is relatively simple. Using AMD Ryzen Master Utility software, you can keep an eye on your CPU temperatures, speeds, core voltage, and much more. If your high-end gaming PC is ready for it, you can overclock the AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. However, it doesn't come with any type of cooler, so it's recommended to use a liquid cooling system to ensure your PC temperatures are kept well within range. Finally, the number 10 position is dominated by Intel Core i5 11400. The Intel Core i5 11400 is one of the best budget gaming CPU on the market. Compared with AMD entry-level Ryzen 5 3600, this Intel chip beats the competition. It offers a welcome balance of performance and value, producing high-performance single-thread work. Included in the Intel Core i5 11400 is a bundle cooler. While it would be sufficient for application performance, gaming enthusiasts will require a better cooler to ensure their system's temperature doesn't exceed the maximum and damage performance. The Intel Core i5 11400 supports memory overclocking, so it's an affordable alternative for those who want to tinker. That's all for today. We upload budget-friendly product review videos every single day, so don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for the upcoming video notification.